This is the first Sunday in Advent, and we're going to be beginning our series of sermons. There's just 4 this year because there's just 4 Sundays in Advent. And we're going to be looking at the prophecies and promises in the Older Testament that point forward to the coming of Christ as the fulfillment of God's plan for our lives. Now, I do want to caution you that some of the passages we're going to be looking at won't seem to have a direct link with the Christmas story, but as we look closer, I think you'll begin to see that it is there. The overall message that I want to convey to you is that God has done something in Christ that changes everything else. And so you have to look at the way things were in order to be able to see the way things became and the way things can be for us as well. And this morning we want to begin by looking at Jeremiah's promise that hope is coming. We lit the candle of hope as we began the service this morning. We all have hopes. We all have dreams, don't we? I know with the flu season having such an impact on our people, there are some of you here and some who can't be here this morning who are hoping that the flu is soon going to be over. We hope that people will like us. Most of us like to be liked by other people. We hope we can make more money in the new year, get a better job. We hope we could really make a difference in the world. Many of us, I think, are hoping, especially this Christmas, that the message of peace and the message of hope and the message of love will really sink into the hearts and minds of the people, and that the world will become a better place as we embrace the Christ of Christmas. There's perhaps not a day goes by, but that we don't hear that word hope. And I think that's because, if only subconsciously, we all know that it's pretty tough to get through even one day without having a sense of hope. But what exactly is it we reference when we use that word hope? Here's a definition that I feel comfortable embracing, and I think you will as well. Hope is a vision of something better that actually makes a difference to us in the here and now. Hope tells us that there's something better just up the road than what we're experiencing right now. But real hope is not an empty promise. Real hope speaks to our hearts and to our minds in such a way that it actually makes a difference in the way we look at and experience the present moment and all that's going on in our lives, as well as the future. I spent 10 years as an adult student, while holding full-time appointments as a teacher at training college and then as a Corps officer for 5 years in Peterborough. If I knew I was going into the final exam with a pass mark on the course already, and that I could keep my A average if I studied hard, I want you to know I studied hard. The hope of doing well on the exam motivated me to work hard right now. If you meet with your boss and the boss tells you, here's what you're going to have to do to get a raise, won't the hope of getting that raise motivate you to do what it is he's asking you to do right now to get the raise? Hope is a vision of something you've been promised for the future that actually changes your attitude and your experience of the present. Our family recently came through a grueling journey toward the end of life for our beloved Joyce. As your pastors, Lynette and I have recently been with several other families that have made that journey. I think in the past 3 or 4 months, I've been with 4 people as they took their last breath and went into eternity. I have to tell you that what makes that journey bearable for us and for those who are experiencing the end of life is the promise that something better awaits our loved one. That something better is not just in the future. It makes a difference in the way our loved one is actually dying and in the way that we're sharing that experience with them. Because we know that something better awaits them. They can make the journey more easily, and we can make the journey alongside of them much more easily. Hope for tomorrow makes a huge difference in the way we live our lives today. And on this first Sunday of Advent, I want to encourage you to embrace a hope that will take care of your future, but which will also take care of your present. Allow me to introduce you for a few moments to the prophet of hope. Jeremiah is not some mystical figure. He really did exist. Around the year 627 BC, when Jeremiah was just a teenager, God came to him and said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you to be a prophet to the nations." Jeremiah 1 and 5. When he was in his 40s, Jeremiah was a spiritual leader for a community in crisis. It's 587 BC, and the king of Babylon and his troops have surrounded the capital city of Jerusalem, cutting off their supplies and leaving the people inside Jerusalem on the brink of starvation. You can read more about that in 2 Kings chapter 25. Zedekiah is the king of Israel, and he still thinks he can beat Nebuchadnezzar, and so he keeps on fighting. But Jeremiah tells the king, "It's pointless, Zedekiah. You need to give up and give in. Your enemy will come into the city, and you will surrender. So you can trust God and do it the easy way, or you can keep on trying to do it the hard way." And as was so often the case with the prophet's advice, the king will not listen, and Zedekiah will choose to do it the hard way. The other spiritual leaders and prophets are telling Zedekiah, "You know, Jeremiah is just an out-of-his-mind fraud. You don't need to listen to him." They told the king exactly what he wanted to hear. "You're in charge here, not Jeremiah. Nobody can defeat us. We always win because God's always on our side." But Jeremiah warned the king that these prophets were really offering a false sense of hope and security. Listen to what he said, chapter 6, verse 14. "They dress the wounds of my people as though they were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace." And Jeremiah told the king that this is not like the past, Zedekiah. This is not a military issue. This is a spiritual issue. The people of God have rejected the covenant of God. They've been committing spiritual adultery far too long. Of course, King Zedekiah wouldn't believe him, so he accused Jeremiah of being unpatriotic, and they throw him in jail. There's the picture. So here's Jeremiah sitting in a stone-cold prison cell. He's misunderstood. He's persecuted. He's accused of being delusional or insane. And yet in this dreadful place, he will proclaim some of the most powerful words of hope found in the entire Hebrew Bible. In fact, chapters 30 to 33 of Jeremiah are often called the Book of Hope. According to the Bible, hope is a vision of something better. "The days are coming," declares the Lord, in Jeremiah 33 and 14. And all throughout the Older Testament, you find these hints and pictures and clues that say the same thing. Something better is coming. And they're so powerful that when you get into them, they can really take your breath away. Perhaps now is a good time to emphasize that in order for hope to really mean something to the person offering the hope, the person who is actually speaking the hope has to be credible and has to be reliable, or else you don't really believe that something better is actually on the way. We all remember the picture of sunny days and sunny ways from the last election. And who can forget the promise that we're going to make America great again by our friends to the south? Are there meaningful signs that these promises are actually coming to fruition? Do we really believe that they actually will? Or do we simply chalk it up to the stuff of electoral rhetoric and the electoral process? If you're a Christian, You know that hope depends on the reliability of the one who gives the promise. It's never based on our wishful thinking or positive feeling or even how much faith we have. Hope is grounded in a God who says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you, even in the most difficult of circumstances. And when this God makes a promise, we tend to put our hope in it. So biblical hope is not some pie in the sky. It's based on the biblical history of God's activity in the world and our personal history with that God. We have a relationship with God who created and sustained and continues to sustain the world. And that history reveals the character of God, and that's why we trust Him. Because in watching what He's doing, we get to know who He is. There's an ongoing conversation these days about which is right, science or religion. But in the Bible, science and faith are never mutually exclusive. And I don't think they need to be today either. You see, hope is based on reason. It's not irrational. It's not some blind leap of faith into the unknown. It's an informed, well thought out, and reasonable choice to put your trust in someone who has a proven track record and who's made some very well-grounded promises for our future. That's what faith is. It's not a blind leap. The vision that something better is coming is not the product of naive and uninformed wishful thinking. The prophecies and promises point to a person. Hope is not wrapped up in our wants and our wishes for a better life. Hope is wrapped up in a person. The biblical word for that person throughout the Old Testament is the word Messiah. In verse 15, the person is called a righteous branch who will sprout from David's line. Now, what does that mean? Now, remember, David is the greatest of all of the kings in the Older Testament. He was far from perfect, if you know his story, but he was a warrior for justice and truth, and the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart even. Towards the end of David's life and throughout the rest of the Old Testament, God kept promising, I'm going to raise up a king like David, only he's going to be better than David. He will rule my people, and he will bless the whole world. Then Jeremiah refers to Jesus as the Lord our righteousness. That's a significant phrase. You see, in the Bible, righteousness is a relational term. In other words, a righteous person is someone who lives totally right with God and with others. You know, the Bible makes it abundantly clear that none of us are righteous. There are times, perhaps, when we get it right, and we might even think we're righteous, but that doesn't count much. You're either righteous or you're not. And none of us just get it right. But this branch, this promised one, this Messiah, will be called the Lord our righteousness. Now, did you notice that as Jeremiah uses the word our righteousness? He will get it right all the time. He will be the only fully righteous being who has ever lived. And this leads us to the heart of the gospel. The New Testament declares that when Jesus, the Lord our righteousness, died on a cross, he took upon himself our unrighteousness. And in an incredibly uneven exchange, we received his righteousness. Think about it. He takes our unrighteousness and gives us his righteousness. That's pretty amazing. So hope is about prophecies and promises and a person, but hope also changes us in the present. Now here's a shock for you. Hope will ruin your life. Sometimes it's actually better not to hope. Hopelessness closes the door of your heart. And once you start hoping, you become vulnerable again. Hope gives birth to an intense longing, because now you have something you want. Hope will turn your life upside down. Look at all those years that Leaf fans look for a cup. I knew I was going to get it. All those years they spent looking for a cup. Now, you have to admire their loyalty and their devotion. I think some of them just got used to looking for something better. But now it seems they just might have a party to go to. Do you know how tough it is for a Habs fan to say that? There's a sense in which all of that hope by all of those fans for all of those years is being vindicated, and their world is joyfully turned upside down. Do you hear what I'm saying in perhaps such a trivial illustration? Hope always draws a picture of a fascinating and beautiful future. It's coming, says the prophet. It's going to be yours, promises the prophet. The one who has promised it is faithful and true, but you'll have to wait for it. But even in the waiting, there is something better. Do you see how hope changes you? If you'll open your heart to Jesus, He'll give you a vision of something better. And for the follower of Jesus, that something better has actually already come, at least in part. The something better promised in the Older Testament is available to us right here and right now. You can call on the name of the Lord, and you can receive and enter into the promise of something better. That's the good news of the gospel, that the power of God is available today, not just tomorrow, not just in the distant future. God's beautiful future has already begun, and you and I can have a taste of it today. But I have to warn you, once you start to do that, you won't be able to go back anymore. You have to live it fully and passionately and deeply. One of my favorite movies for many years has been The Shawshank Redemption. And one of the characters in that movie says a very interesting line. He says, "Hope is a dangerous thing. It can drive you insane. When you come to Jesus, He will upset your life. He will infuse you with hope that will upset your life. You can't go back to quote-unquote normal anymore." Jeremiah couldn't live a comfortable life anymore. Life as he knew it was over. He couldn't just go along with the crowd that was cheering Zedekiah and offering cheap and shallow hope. God had given him a picture of a new future and a new hope. And even if it meant going to jail, Jeremiah just couldn't look back. Hope ruins your life because once you experience hope, you can never go back to life as you once knew it. When God says something better is coming, and we actually start to believe it, it will change us. We start to align our lives with that hope. I shared with the men in Whitby last week at the men's retreat that hope is also a very risky business. Hope causes us to risk, which is exactly what Jeremiah does in chapter 32. There's an interesting story there, and I want to wrap things up with that story this morning. I encourage you to read it for yourself in chapter 32. In the year 587 BC, while the Babylonian army was hammering away at Jerusalem, Jeremiah knew that the army would break through the wall, conquer the city, and haul most of the people into exile. The situation looked utterly hopeless. So the next day, Jeremiah's uncle comes to visit him in prison, and he offers to sell Jeremiah a vacant lot in the suburbs of Jerusalem. Now, this is the worst time to buy property, perhaps. The city is under siege. It's going to fall to the Babylonian army, and everyone is going to get deported. But Jeremiah lives by the promises of God. Now pay attention. Again, this isn't wishful thinking or merely a feeling for Jeremiah. It's all based on God's track record in creation and in history and in redemption. And so, based on what God promises to do, despite what seems to be happening right now, Jeremiah says, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And so he buys the field, hoping to come back and live in that field when God has kept his promise. God had given a promise of something better. He had said that captivity would end and that the people would return to this very land. And Jeremiah said, I believe that with all my heart. I believe it so much that I'm going to buy a piece of land to live on when that happens. It's not just an empty promise. It isn't just a weak promise of hope. If you put your faith in it, it can change the decisions you're making right now. So Jeremiah puts his faith into practice. And I want to say to you in concluding this morning that if you have hope, if you hold on to God's promise of something better, if you're trusting that Jesus is the righteous one, it has to work its way into your life. It has to start affecting the things you're doing now, the things you're thinking now, the decisions you're making now, or else you don't really believe it. The risk may be small, they may be mid-sized, they may be great, but you have to put your hope into practice. If that's what God says is going to happen, then here's what I'm going to do right now. As we walk through this season of Advent, the season of waiting and longing and rejoicing and hoping, you're going to notice that I'm going to leave you with more questions than answers. I want to leave you with some things to ponder at the end of each of these 4 sermons on Sunday mornings. I'm going to invite the praise and worship team to come just now. They're going to help us sing My Hope is Built on Nothing Less. But while they're coming and while they're setting up, I'm going to ask you to already start thinking about these questions. Here's the first one. Is your hope centered in the person of Jesus Christ or something else? Secondly, as you've grown as a Christian, has your hope expanded or has it diminished? Are you further ahead now than when you first believed? Your faith stronger? Your belief in what God is promising to do greater? Or has it diminished? How has hope upset your life? Think about it. What are you willing to risk because of who Jesus is and what he's done? Jeremiah was prepared to buy a field because God said this is going to happen later. What is God challenging you to do now because of what God says is going to happen later? Jesus is coming. He's gone to prepare a place for you. He's coming to receive you unto himself. What do you have to do to be ready? What do you want to do for him now? What's God asking you to do? What's he calling you to do for him now? Just think about these questions. And if you need to make a deeper commitment of your life to Jesus this morning, you can do that while the praise and worship team leads us in singing My Hope is Built on Nothing Less.
Built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. When darkness seems to hide its face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. My anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of When He shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless.